Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here. Today on the big program, lots to get to, lots to talk about. The day of Billy Barr on Capitol Hill. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Bill Barr's testimony because, to be honest, there was nothing that wasn't expected. As I call it, it's test of lying. You've got your facts, and you're just gonna make it as presentable for your side as possible. And Barr clearly is Donald Trump's client. Trump is clearly Barr's client. He's clearly the main focus. Not going to in any way side with the American people over Donald Trump. So that's kind of where it was, and nothing really surprising. There were some heated exchanges. Some good moments for the cameras, some theatrics, but to be honest, I didn't get much from it other than what we already know. And that is that, Bill Barr is Trump's guy. He's going to do the marching orders of the White House. He is not independent, no matter how much he says he is. And the reality is he's good at doing these kind of displays. As upset and as angry as people were getting, he maintained a monotone and gave the hardline message, which is what you expected out of him. I know a lot of people we want fireworks, we want all this. It wasn't that, or at least in my view, it wasn't. And I'm sure this will come up. The one thing that did, again, you get your little shots in and you make your points. Barr did again acknowledge that Russia did interfere in the 2016 election, and he did say that. You have to assume that the Kremlin's going to do it again. You have to assume that there are actors out there who are doing this. It is what it is. And the fact that he and the administration to this point have really done nothing whatsoever to thwart any of the interference is really, really troubling. Now, he did come out, the Russian stuff's all bogus. I'm not buying that, not even a little bit. But that, again, is the Trump line. He's got to stick with that. He did say that there's no reason to think the election is going to be rigged, which I found kind of interesting. But he did then go the Trumpian line of, but mail-in ballots are bad. So that for me, that was about it. There wasn't much more to be had from this. But the thing that gets me is, and again, this is one of those moments where having Barr come out and say that the 2016 election, there was interference and that the Russians were behind it is one of those key moments because today you had U.S. intelligence officials coming out with a report and they've determined that Russian operatives are spreading tons of disinformation about the virus. And they're doing it on websites here in the U.S. in very plain English. So that, the adults who, I don't need no stinking mask, that crowd can get it. And the reality is I've been getting a lot of emails from people and a lot of, Facebook videos and stuff. Hey, have you seen this? Have you seen this? And they're really, really, you have to give them credit, really well done propaganda pieces. It's pretty remarkable. I mean, the first one today I woke up to was, a Yugoslavian woman, rewriting Yugoslav history on why socialism is bad and why everything that we're seeing in the U.S. is exactly what happened in Yugoslavia. And I'm going, the person that they have behind these videos is a good propagandist. I mean, the guy is good at what he does. I give him credit, and I recognized his name, so I immediately said, I don't take anything that this guy says with any amount of serious thought. This is purely, the right-wing gamesmanship. They're taking some bits and pieces that they can, piece together, and look, they're good at it. They spend, untold amounts of money shaping propaganda to get us to fear each other. And to use what's going on in the streets and with the protests to say, this is just like communism. And unfortunately, a lot of people are buying it. And you look at some of these slick websites and you look at some of the stuff that's out there. And if you're not willing to dig deeper than just watching the 2-minute video or following along on the glossy timeline, it's easy to get from point A to point B without considering that there's a whole lot in between. And this is where I've been really kind of weirded out because there's so much. Look, we've always had tinfoil. We've always had the tinfoil hat brigade. We've always had the kooks on the fringe where everything is a conspiracy. It's the deep state. It's the Bilderbergs. It's the Illuminati. Now it's the deep state, and it's these politicians who have all this power. And look, do they have too much power? Yeah. But are they that well organized? I'm struggling with the conspiracy. I'm struggling that the Democrats, and in fact, there was a megachurch out in Michigan. Another listener sent me a video that evidently they're playing in megachurches, because evidently this QAnon stuff is now picking up in the churches, and there's money being funneled in through the churches, and it's interesting because I'd like to know where the money is coming from. Is it coming from the Russians? Is it coming from the Chinese? Is it coming from the right wing, spin machine here in the U.S. to keep us ripped apart so that, maybe we don't ask for, better wages, hours, conditions. Maybe we don't fight for health care for everyone. Maybe we don't have schools that are, maybe we don't do a whole bunch of those things that we haven't been doing for the last 40, 50 years. And it just got me to thinking that is this the way that the right wing and the people who want to do us harm are going to attack us through religion? And the answer is yes. And immediately when they sent me this video, I responded to the person. I said, this reminds me of George Orwell's 2 Minutes Hate. This reminds me of if you read the book, they're screaming for 2 minutes at whoever the enemy of the day is, and it's the propaganda that's in front of them that they're supposed to hate every minute. And this is kind of that, just much, much better done. But the thing is there's so much of it. We're just being inundated. And at this point, I look at almost no videos on Facebook. I'm almost to the cat video stage at this point. If it's highly produced, I stay away from it, because the sad reality is there's so much misinformation out there, and look, this pandemic is part of this. I don't know if you saw the video that was viral yesterday. Breitbart, and this is another one of those questions. Who's funding Breitbart? They put together a group, they called themselves America's Frontline Doctors. And they staged this press conference out in front of the Supreme Court building. And they had this really very, eloquent speaking African woman. I think the accent sounded like it, who was, just going on about how she's cured hundreds of people using the hydroxychloroquine and the zinc and the Zithromax, and how she's never lost a patient, and how, we have a cure and you don't need a mask, and just on and on and on. And you had the president retweeted it. You had Dumb Jr. retweeted it. You had the right wing just jump right on this because finally there's a doctor out there saying that we have the cure. We don't have to do any of that mask stuff. And I, like a lot of people, wanted to know who this woman was. So I Googled her name, and wow, kind of an interesting character. Dr. Stella Emanuel, and this is one of those moments where you go, okay, so much misinformation out there. Did she really say that gynecological problems are caused by people who dream of having sex with demons and witches? Did she really say that? According to her stuff, yes. Does she really believe that alien DNA is used in medical treatments? I don't know, but it's out there. So the same woman who's saying, don't wear a mask, we've got a cure, believes we've got alien DNA. She said scientists are making a vaccine to stop people from being religious. She said the U.S. government is partly run by lizard people. Now that one, I don't even know that I believe that. And this is where we're at in this world, where there's almost nothing that you go, yeah, I buy that. I mean, this woman is such a caricature. And you even wonder if she's real at some point. That's how screwed up things have gotten. And I must have gotten that video from 100 people going, see, you're wrong, Rick. See, this doctor, she knows. And I go, yeah, there's one. I can line up a bunch of doctors who are saying, no, the research that we're seeing is this, and this. And what's weird is it comes down to our biases. Do I want to believe that we have a cure? You bet I do. I want to believe that hydroxychloroquine is the answer. I want to believe taking a little zinc and the Zenimax. I want to believe that if I get it, I'm going to be okay. I want to chuck the mask and be able to go back to business as usual. But you know what? All of the sane, rational thought out there, all of the sane, rational reports that are coming out are saying, be cautious. The doctors that I trust, the ones that I know personally, have known for years, they're telling me that long after the government says you can stop wearing a mask, you better be wearing one. Long after all of this stuff happens, you better be taking care of yourself. And this is where the crazy videos aside, it comes back to us finding some sanity and maybe stopping with looking for the gotcha political moment. Because I didn't talk much about this yesterday. I saw it and I was like, it's too kooky, too far out, too crazy for me. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe she doesn't believe that there's demon semen, and maybe sex with witches is something that does give women gynecological problems. But when you started seeing mainstream New York Times, Washington Post, ABC, NBC, when you started seeing people pick this up, picking this woman's story apart, then I started going, well, there's something here. But you know who didn't care? People like Breitbart. These websites that are just clickbaiting you to one, make money. Ultimately, it's about the greed. It's about you to click on their sites and get their and jack up their numbers and them to grab your information. But two, it's about the whole mental control thing, about causing that division and ripping us apart at a moment where we can't afford to be all that far apart. It's crazy, crazy times. Also, some good news today. We find out that Joe Biden is going to name his VP next week. That's going to happen. So get your money out now on who your pick of the week is. And I did ask earlier what the price of scrap metal is, since Hurricane Hannah has knocked down a pretty big section of Donald Trump's border wall in South Texas. The video is on our Twitter page. Of just some wind knocking it down. So I wonder what scrap metal is going for. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Are you buying the videos? Are you getting the propaganda stuff? Are you getting hit by the bots? Or do you not even know what they look like? And that's part of the problem as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, the National Labor Relations Board has come out with some new thoughts on how they're going to screw workers over. When we come back, our good friend Paul Segunda is going to be here to share some thoughts on the latest attacks on working people here in the U.S. Quick break. Right back.
Nothing more American than workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On the Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1917. That was the day more than 10,000 African Americans marched down New York's Fifth Avenue in what is known as the Silent Parade. The protest came in the aftermath of the July 2nd East St. Louis race riot and a number of lynchings in Texas. Organized by black scholar and activist W.E.B. Du Bois, James Weldon Johnson, and the NAACP, the Silent Parade protested lynchings and anti-black violence. Children led the march dressed in white. Women, who were also dressed in white, followed them. Men dressed in dark suits marched behind. It was considered the first public protest of racial violence in the United States. Alexis Newman describes the scene as the parade proceeds to Madison Square. The marchers carried banners and posters stating their reasons for the march. Both participants and onlookers remarked that this protest was unlike any other seen in the city and the nation. There were no chants, no songs, just silence. Some signs read, "Mother, do lynchers go to heaven?" and "Mr. President, why not make America safe for democracy?" Protesters hoped President Woodrow Wilson would make good on his election promises to promote rights for blacks. But Wilson took no action. In fact, he opposed anti-lynching legislation and continued segregationist policies in federal offices. In an editorial for the New York Age, James Weldon Johnson pointed out, quote, that their brothers and sisters, people just like them, were Jim Crowed and segregated and disenfranchised and oppressed and lynched and burned alive in this, the greatest republic in the world, the great leader in the fight for democracy and humanity.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So an interesting story yesterday from Reuters that pointed out that Hobby Lobby once again has won a victory on their workforce. You know, we've talked about these forced arbitration clauses that employers make people sign as a condition of employment. In fact, you know, I told the story of an aunt who worked for a company for like 20 years. And 20 years into employment, they walk in, slap it on her desk, said sign it or leave. And that's perfectly legal. But the story goes that Hobby Lobby, again, citing the 2018 Epic Systems ruling, has upheld their forced arbitration clause. And here to share a little bit of on that and also some of the other horrible things our National Labor Relations Board has been up to, I've asked our good friend, labor lawyer Paul Segunda, to come talk with us. Paul, thanks for taking time for us.
Always a pleasure. Glad to be here.
So here again, we've got another moment where the Trump NLRB siding with corporate America over that of workers. And in this case, one of those companies that I just think is terrible.
Well, Hobby Lobby came to notoriety when it said it had religious rights as a private employer to deprive women of contraception. And the Supreme Court upheld that ridiculous notion as if corporations have religious beliefs. And now they're taking advantage of the Epic Systems case to enforce very unfair, one-sided arbitration provisions that forces anyone with an employment or labor claim to take their claim to arbitration. And if you don't think that's bad, well, I can tell you that arbitration tends to be very one-sided. The arbitrators know where their bread is buttered. It's buttered by the employers. There is no accountability. There are no decisions. There's no reasoned elaborated decisions for their rulings, and it tends to come out very much, not surprisingly, in favor of employers. So forcing employers into arbitration is just awful.
No, I mean, but this is what we get with this administration, and I think we're in a moment. What's interesting is we're in the middle of a global pandemic, and to highlight how bad things are, we're in the midst of a global pandemic, and the Republicans, their HEALS Act, one of the letters in the word HEALS is a liability shield. So their mindset is most certainly we've got to take care of corporate America and their interests above everybody else's.
They've always done that. Look at gun manufacturers, look at any type of corporation who wants some kind of subsidy or bailout. They're all for corporate welfare, but they're not for helping the average person, the average worker. It's really very disconcerting.
And again, the pendulum, I don't want to see the pendulum swing way too far to one side or the other, but it seems like right now the pendulum has shot to the extreme of the corporate side and against working people in ways that, a couple years ago we were just imagining going to happen.
Well, it all started with the decline of the unions, Rick. I mean, unions at least gave individual workers collective power to fight back. Then we had these kind of hodgepodge statutory rights, employment discrimination, wage and hour laws, employee benefit protections. But now you don't even get those statutory protections. You're basically being forced into a contract of adhesion. It's take it or leave it. You don't have an ability to bargain. You have to take it or you have to look for a job somewhere else. And those contracts force you into arbitration, into that unfair arbitration process. The only good news is that if we get a Democratic president with a Democratic Congress, both Senate and House, there is something that has been introduced into the House called the Arbitration Fairness Act, which would do away with mandatory arbitration clauses. And that is what I'm hopeful about.
No, I'm with you right there. There's a lot of potential and there are a lot of possibilities. But at the end of the day, if you don't get out and vote and we don't have this change,
Right.
all of this horrible stays. And today I got another email from the National Labor Relations Board because I'm on their press release list where
Right.
they've laid out how they're now not going to allow unions to get the names and addresses and email addresses of employees, which has been how things have been for years.
Forever. Decade.
This is,
Decade.
again, another one of those moments of silencing and quashing the ability of workers to organize.
Absolutely. So just to tell your listeners, there used to be a list that a union would get when they started to organize workers called an Excelsior list. An Excelsior list would give you addresses and phone numbers, and in recent years they added emails as well. This would be an essential way for unions to figure out who makes up the appropriate bargaining unit, who they have to persuade and organize into a majority support for a union. Without that, remember, we have cases like Lechmere, Republic Aviation that say you can't go in to an employer's property during work time to solicit or to distribute literature. You're only left with standing out on the sidewalk. And if anyone remembers the famous scene from Norma Ray, and maybe I'm dating myself here, where he's standing out on the sidewalk trying to hand out leaflets, it's not a very effective way to organize people. They don't want to be bothered. And more importantly, they don't want to be seen as making friends with the union guy.
Right.
So not giving them these basic fundamental pieces of information, which are so important for organizing, is really going to set the union movement even further back than it already is. I can tell you that the Obama rule, which allowed for addresses and email, only allowed for business email. It didn't even require personal email. So if people were worried that it was going to trace them back to their homes or to their more personal affairs, even the Obama rule, which allowed emails to be given out to unions, was only business email and really never said anything like a home address had to be given out. So there are plenty of privacy protections. One other point, Rick, there is a case in the National Labor Relations Board that's been around for another 30 years called Macaulay Newspapers. And this was a case where the union was trying to get information from the employer in order to protect employees who were denied promotion during a given promotion process. And so they said, hey, we want to see what these employees got on the tests that were being used to promote them. And the employer said, we're not going to do that because we have to respect the privacy rights of our employees. But really, they just didn't want to give out the tests because they weren't really following the tests. They were just promoting their favorite people. So what the board said, which I think makes a lot of sense, is we have to balance interests here. We have to balance the employees' privacy interests versus the union's ability to organize, or in that case, to receive information to protect employees during arbitrations. I think the same thing here is true. If you want to protect employees' privacies, there are compromises that can be made. Don't give out home addresses. Don't give out personal emails. Give out their business emails. Give the union a chance to make contact with the employee so that they have a legitimate shot to tell them all the advantages of unionization. If the union can't do that, if the union can't even find those that it's seeking to organize, well, the game's over before it's begun.
Right.
So this is truly, truly damaging, the current rule that's being proposed by the three members of the NLRB and the Republican General Counsel. There are no Democrats right now. That's something you have to remember with the NLRB right now.
Yeah, I mean, they're just going to run roughshod anyway. But
Right.
you know, my problem is with the company emails. You know, you've said a couple of times you give the company emails. Isn't there a chilling effect to having those kind of communications between a union and an employee on a company email that we already know that can be searched and gotten? I mean, isn't that wouldn't that be counterintuitive?
There is the issue of computer surveillance and being seen as on the wrong team when it comes to the employer. If you're worried that your email is being monitored, this is a voluntary thing. Certainly, employees who want to learn more about the union can still say to the union, here's my home email, here's my personal email. This is just a default. So at the very least, everyone in the bargaining unit has to be available through their business email. It seems like a compromise to me. Is it perfect? No. But there are privacy concerns. We have to understand that employees do have the right not to interact with unions if they don't want to. There is a right to refrain under the law as well. So we have to provide kind of the neutral framework where they can either choose to engage or choose to disengage. But this rule doesn't allow that. This rule kind of makes the decision for the union potential members who might not ever be contacted now. And that's really problematic. And it's part and parcel of what's been going on in labor law for most of the last 30 years, with the exception of the Obama board, which is essentially isolating potential union members from learning about the benefits of unionism, so they never get the true chance to see whether it will work for their bargaining unit. That's a real problem.
Yeah, when I saw this today, because I've been saying, you know, we're on this moment, and maybe you'll agree with me, but we're at this moment where all of the problems that our society has, socioeconomically, all of the fissures that we have in the workplace are now becoming glaringly apparent. And people are now lifting their head going, you know, I'm more vulnerable than I was. I realize I have zero power whatsoever. And there are people who, I get emails from people all the time going, you know, how do I do this? Who do I talk to? Where do I go? And I saw this as one of those moments of, this is how we cut this off. This is how we cut the head of the serpent off and end it right here.
Absolutely. And let me just give your union inclined viewers something to be somewhat optimistic about. You might recall that when the current occupant of the White House came in, he used something called the Congressional Review Act to essentially get rid of hundreds of regulations, including number of labor regulations, the fiduciary regulation that was being considered by the Department of Labor for people who had to invest their retirement savings. A number of rules with regard to union persuaders were discarded. Well, similarly, this same Congressional Review Act can be used by the new majority, if people vote, and the new president to undo all of these business-friendly rules. I mean, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And if the Republican president and the Senate were going to use the Congressional Review Act to get rid of labor-friendly laws back in 2017 and 2018, well, a Democratic Congress and a Democratic president can do the same thing in 2021 and 2022. And so what I'm doing, Rick, if you don't understand, is I'm trying to get people in your state of Pennsylvania, which is very important, in my state of Wisconsin, which is very important, to get out and vote and not be content that things are going or seeming to go well. Don't rest on any laurels. Don't count any chickens. Get out there, vote, get your friends to vote, bring 5 people with you to the polls. Whatever it is, we cannot cut off the head of the snake, as you put it, until we win this election in November, and do so in epic proportions, so there can be no argument that it's close or anything like that. And of course, we need to take the Senate as well to make things stick.
No, certainly.
So I'm hopeful that those things will happen, but that's what we're looking at right now.
No, it's most certainly what we need to be doing, and you're right. But here's my problem. I completely understand that everything Trump has done through executive order and through regulatory action, we can undo with the next administration. My problem is this kind of swinging back and forth, this kind of uncertainty, this kind of chaos isn't good. It's not good for employers. It's certainly not good for workers, and it's not good for stability's sake. And this is what I'm hoping people will step back and go, partisan politics aside, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or a liberal or conservative, employment rights, what you get at the job, your ability to bargain for better wages, hours, and conditions, that should be universal across the board. At least that's just how I view it.
Well, no, I mean, it applies to everyone. Now that I'm back in private practice, I have very sophisticated, high-earning employees who I represent who are just as astounded to learn as my low-earning employees to learn that they don't have any rights in the workplace. I mean, they can sign a contract. They're still generally at-will employees who can be fired for good reason, bad reason, no reason at all. I was just talking to someone today on the phone who was asking me, well, you mean I was treated unfairly? There's nothing I can do? I was like, well, is it based on a protected characteristic? Do you have a disability? Are you over 40 years of age? Are you, of a certain race, national origin, gender, on and on and on? Now sexual orientation, thankfully. But, generally, if you can't show that, if you can't make that kind of case, you are a sitting duck when your employer decides that it doesn't like you anymore and doesn't want you around anymore. It could be the color of your shirt. I'm wearing a green shirt. I don't like you wearing a green shirt. You're fired. Do you have a legal claim? No, you don't. Not in the United States of America. In other countries, you would, because in other countries, you need a good reason, a just cause. That's the importance, again, of unions. I sound like I'm beating the same drum here, but the union, more than just giving higher wages and better benefits, the most important thing that a union gives you is just cause protection in your workplace so that you can't be fired for an arbitrary or discriminatory reason.
No, in fact, the shirt the shirt analogy is actually factual. There was a law firm down in Florida, as I remember, several years back, where they fired all the secretaries and all of the paralegals because they wore an orange shirt to work one day, and they thought that this was anarchy, and they got rid of them. Had they said they were joining a union, maybe they'd have got out of it.
Yeah, right. Well, we had the same thing here in the Midwest. A guy who was working at a Chicago dealership had the audacity of wearing a Green Bay Packers shirt. He was gone. And that's just because the Packers are a better team.
I can see that. No, I'm kidding. Yeah. But it's just one of those things that until it happens to you, you don't realize just how bad it is. So last, just to finish this up, I mean, what I'm hoping folks will take from this is what you said. The reality is, without a union contract, you don't really have any rights on the job, and the only way you get those rights is with a union contract. And then vote this November to get this Orange Menace out, and we end up with maybe changing some of the laws back to protect us.
Well, we'll end up with a lot of people with green shirts, just like I'm wearing right now. There's one other thing I want to say real quick. The second part that we didn't cover on the proposed rulemaking by the NLRB was to allow mail-in ballots by the military. And I have mixed feelings about that one in union elections. On the one hand, we've always been for mail-in ballots on the union side. In fact, if you remember, Rick, the Employee Free Choice Act of 2009 wanted ballot, type elections, which could be done through mail-in, right? So I like the mail-in part of the military. I guess what I'm worried about with the military is to make sure that they're truly part of the bargaining unit and they're just not using additional people to outvote the union by having people who might not be part of the bargaining unit. So that's something I'm worried about with the military members who are off on service. I want them to be involved in the union, but I want to make sure they're part of the appropriate bargaining unit too.
Yeah, good point. But lots of stuff going on. And Paul, I appreciate you taking some time and breaking it down for us, making it digestible for someone like me.
My pleasure. Always happy to be there. Happy to come back.
Good stuff. I appreciate it. Great to have you back. Our good friend, labor lawyer Paul Segunda. Like I said, we're in a weird time. But every time you turn around, one more death of a 1,000 paper cuts. Love to hear your thoughts, though. Do you think employers should be able to hold your information from those evil unions, or do you think the union should be able to reach out and contact and make their case? You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Love to hear your thoughts. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2.
On this day in labor history, the year was 1932. That was the day that flames burnt in the U.S. Capitol. The U.S. Armed Forces set fire to a shanty town of unemployed World War I veterans. The veterans had come to the Capitol to demand the bonus that they had been promised for their service. The payment was not due until 1945. But the nation was in the throes of the Great Depression. Desperate veterans demanded the bonus be paid early. Walter W. Walters, a veteran and unemployed former cannery worker, called for his fellow veterans to go to Washington, D.C. and demand payment. From across the country, veterans answered the call. Many hopped trains to make their way to the nation's capital. They called themselves the Bonus Expeditionary Force. This echoed the American Expeditionary Force, the name for U.S. troops that had fought in France during World War I. In May, the veterans began to arrive in Washington, D.C. They set up tents and shelters in vacant lots and open spaces. The largest encampment was along the Anacostia River. Some in Washington began to warn that the 8,000 protesters of the Bonus Army were led by communists. But retired Marine Corps Major General Smedley Butler came to the camp to encourage the protesters. He said,
I never saw such fine Americanism as is exhibited by you people. You have just as much right to have a lobby here as any steel corporation. Makes me so damn mad a whole lot of people speak of you as tramps. By God, they didn't speak of you as tramps in 1917 and 18. Oh.
But Army Chief of Staff General MacArthur was less sympathetic. He ordered troops to clear out the veterans. With cavalry, tanks, rifles, and tear gas, they ousted the protesters and burnt the Anacostia River encampment to the ground.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So the HEALS Act, way short of what we need to get through this pandemic. And here in Pennsylvania, what I'm seeing, I don't think it's going to be all that as helpful as we need. It's really insufficient numbers as of this moment. But again, I'm not really surprised by that. The question is in this moment, in this moment of chaos, of pandemic, when interest rates are extraordinarily low, will we take the opportunity to really move our country forward, or is this just an opportunity for big business to line their pockets, as we've seen, and, well, poor people to get a lot poorer? Here to share some thoughts on where we go as a nation, I've asked our good friend Steven Herzenberg to come talk with us. Steve is the executive director of the Keystone Research Center, KeystoneResearch.org, their website. Steve, thanks for taking time for us.
Great to be here, Rick.
So, I'm looking at this, and I know you guys have a statement out today about the response, that being, just completely inadequate. Where do you see us going over the next couple of days with the negotiations?
I think the response from the Republicans in the Senate was completely inadequate. I think we need something better, and I think the Democrats in the U.S. House, led by Nancy Pelosi, are winning the communications war around that. The fact that so many millions of families were receiving those $600 checks that, in addition to unemployment insurance, that allowed them to pay the rent and to put food on the table and to not have to go back to work. so that they could help stem the spread of this virus, which benefits everybody. I think the need to continue support of that kind of scale is so blindingly obvious. As the virus spreads more and more, kind of double the rate nationally recently, as after we thought we'd bent the curve down. So I think we'll end up with something better than the HEALS Act. Probably not enough, but something that puts more money in the pockets of families that need it and mitigates the damage of this COVID crash.
Yeah, but for me, I look at this, and I don't want to get into the whole HEALS Act and what it is and how bad it is, because it is bad. But for me, we're at this moment where, with a little visionary leadership, with a little down road looking, we could really change the direction of this country, and we could possibly reignite a new deal to where we reimagine what places like Appalachia looks like. And I know you guys have a new campaign going on of reimagining what Appalachia could look like and the investments that could be made in high poverty areas. To me, this could be one of those moments.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're right. Last week we unveiled the Reimagine Appalachia campaign, which is kind of anchored in the Ohio Valley, which is southwestern Pennsylvania, southeastern Ohio, West Virginia, and eastern Kentucky. This is a part of Appalachia that's in many cases very poor. It's been, for a century or more, been doing the hard work to mine the coal and extract the energy that fuels the rest of the country, but somehow still ends up poorer in many parts of that region than the rest of the country. And the parts of that region that did better, such as southwestern Pennsylvania and around Pittsburgh, have not done well in the last 40 years. There's been a lot of downward mobility among working people. So it's an area where people are angry. The economy's not been working for them for a long time, despite the fact that people work hard, care about their families and the communities, want to make a contribution, and frankly, some of the despair and opioids in that part of the country reflects the fact that people are not being given an opportunity to contribute. So we think there really is an opportunity now. We have a massive need to kickstart the economy and to create jobs, but we also there's a great deal of carbon emissions that are produced across the country, but including from that region. And so there's a lot of work to be done transitioning our economy, repairing the damage from the last century, whether it's abandoned mine lands or uncapped oil and gas wells. And so we've laid out a detailed agenda, the federal investments that will stimulate the economy and bring us out of the COVID crash are also investments that can reduce carbon emissions. We call it a New Deal that works for us because, the Green New Deal debate has been led by folks on the East and the West Coast. In our agenda, it's got to start with economic opportunity. I mean, you've had four decades where so much of the gains of growth, virtually all of the gains of growth, have gone to the top 1%, the top 10%, and especially the top 1%. So, yeah, we laid out an agenda. It capitalizes on the skills and ingenuity and work ethic of people in that region. We really could use this crisis, this wake-up call, including the wake-up call around racial injustice in this country, and we could craft a new deal that works for everybody, white, black, brown, and so that's what we laid out. And it's ultimately, as you know, Rick, it's not that complicated. I mean, you need to make a bunch of investments in things like sustainable transportation, electric vehicle infrastructure, and rail, things like modernizing the grid. We need universal broadband. We need sustainable manufacturing, not the end of manufacturing, but a renewal of manufacturing, but just cleaner manufacturing. And then we've got, again, a whole lot of work that needs to be done, planting trees, shifting over to agricultural practices that absorb carbon, cleaning up those mine lands. And so really, if we take the decisive actions that we need to, and a lot of our agenda is sort of informed by the New Deal. So let's take some of that work that needs to be done back in the 1930s, the Civilian Conservation Corps,
Right.
Over a decade, employed 3 million people planting trees and building infrastructure in parks and forests, leaving a legacy that still today people benefit from. And that's the equivalent of 10 million jobs in today's workforce. That's work that's almost all outdoors. It can be done honoring social distancing. It's like, let's get going. And the other thing that part of our agenda does is it really does give a lot of folks, I mean, the share of men in the country, but more so in that region that aren't employed, has grown alarmingly over a period of decades since the 1970s. So it would be work that's really honorable work, where people know that they're making a contribution to the greater good. So bottom line is, we absolutely think there is a New Deal that works for us, that could be crafted, that would create the jobs people need, that would demonstrate that there's not a trade-off between people's health and the environment and good middle-class jobs, and give people that chance to contribute again. So it's a matter of winning the policies we need and persuading in this critical election year, from the top of the ticket down to the congressional races and the state level races. We need creative people who are willing to support the decisive government action that gets us a massive twofer in terms of, or threefer in terms of the environment, people's health, the quality of people's jobs, and the strength of our community.
Ultimately, as you pointed out, it's public investment. And so how do you get past the fact that, and I look at West Virginia, that the coal industry is so powerful there, even though you're talking about such a few number of jobs, but the industry is really extremely powerful policy wise. How do you get people to move away from the reality that coal is not coming back, and that we have to move to this new frontier? And we have to clean up all of the mess that mountaintop removal and things like that have done over the years.
So it's not easy, but you have to make the case, and particularly when it comes to workers and families and communities that have seen the loss of middle-class jobs over decades and seen that the jobs that they can get are like low-wage service jobs. You got to make the fact that this public investment will create more good union, middle-class, blue-collar, industrial jobs. You got to make it real for people. So, and the good news is that there are, for example, solar is growing. The good news is we saw a presentation from a developer based in Pittsburgh that's got like 20 different small-scale hydroelectric projects that sort of collectively $500 million of investment in Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. So you got to the second part. We brought out an overall agenda, but the second major release we'll do in the latter part of August is actually an economic study of the jobs that will be created in each of these four states and the four states together if you make those public investments that you need to drive down carbon emissions. And we're very excited to produce those numbers, and I think those numbers will make the case that actually the path we're talking about is going to have a lot more jobs. It's not simply going to replace coal jobs or replace fracking jobs that have now disappeared or create more jobs than the petrochemical facilities that have been a focus of so much discussion out west. It's going to create millions more jobs. But so, we got to make the argument. We got to make it real by pointing to particular living examples. And but that is the reality. The future, betting on fossil fuels and petrochemical at a time when plastic bans are spreading across the world and we have a oceanic plastics crisis. That's betting on the past. We have much more opportunity if we get on the train early in terms of aggressively addressing climate change.
Right.
That's gonna restore the middle class.
And early would have been like 20 years ago. We're kind of late on this.
Yeah,
but it's one of those better late than never kind of things in my mind.
Absolutely, and again, it's like if we can get through, and it's still hard, but if we could get through the skepticism. I mean, the hardest part of making this transition is the early part, and where people can't yet see the jobs, and they don't buy the argument that if you really tie, our plan would tie to the public investment real rights to organize, so they can become good union jobs, including the solar and wind construction can be good union jobs. But so early on, it's hard. But if you can get out of the gate and people begin to see it coming to life, then what you can imagine a situation where really everybody says, okay, we can make this work. Let's all row together. And again, that's what we want to. We want to get to that, and the next 12 months are pivotal to not waiting another 4 years that we can't afford.
I love the optimism, and I love the fact that that there's a chance maybe we try, and I hope people will check out the website reimagineappalachia.org. We'll get the links out on social media so folks can take a look at it. Last question I've got for you, because in this day and age we have to get corporate buy-in. How do you see corporate America coming around to this? They're still trying to prop up fossil fuels. I got to imagine that's going to be your biggest anti-group, no?
Yeah, I mean, there are splits in corporate America. So I was having a conversation with a woman in Pittsburgh yesterday who runs something called the PA Solar Center. She's got 100 different businesses in that industry that are obviously supportive of the policies that will spread renewable energy. You've got a bunch of fossil fuel companies that are hedging their bets, investing in non-fossil fuel stuff as well as still fighting like hell to make sure that they don't have to write off massive losses because of their fossil fuel assets. So the economics right now of fossil fuels, including like coal and even gas electricity, is pretty dismal. And so it's market forces that in the end are driving additional nails into some of the limited number of jobs that are left in the fossil fuel economy. Right. So in the end, I think businesses will fight, and the companies that the executives will loot the fossil fuel companies, as we know, on their way out before they go bankrupt.
Yes, they will.
But in the end, the business community will come around because they're not going to be able to make money. They'll extract the last drop of blood they can from public subsidies at every level. But at the end of the day, they're dinosaurs, and so what our region needs to do, what our policymakers need to do, is recognize where the economy is going and shape that economy so that it is good jobs, it's union jobs, and so that we stop polluting our communities and fouling our air, and more so low-income communities than others. And again, we definitely have a chance to turn a corner here and to create a much brighter future.
There you go. ReimagineAppalachia.org, the website. We'll get links out. You can take a look at all their information there. And when you release the next report, we'd love to have you come back and share what that's going to look like, because I'm excited to hear about what the future is going to look like for employment and how we build a prosperous working class once again. Steve, I appreciate the time.
Sure. And one more quick promo. When you go to reimagineappalachia.org, there's a pop-up video. It's 3 minutes. It's a campaign video, but it's a wonderful video. The narrator is a woman who runs the Ohio think tank, who comes from Kentucky, and it's a beautiful video, and it really communicates how we can honor the values of the people of Appalachia and reimagine it and create that better future. So 3 minutes of your time. It's not wonkery. It's worth it. Go to the website.
We'll make sure we get that as well. Steve, I appreciate the time, man.
All right. Cool. Bye.
Good stuff. Our good friend, Dr. Stephen Herzenberg, Executive Director of the Keystone Research Center. Their website, keystoneresearch.org. But go to reimagineappalachia.org and check out their work right there. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2.
On this day in labor history, the year was 1913. Silk workers in Paterson, New Jersey ended their unsuccessful 6-month strike. By 1900, Paterson had won the nickname Silk City. Skilled weavers, ribbon weavers in particular, were proud of their craft. They were tenacious in fighting for the respect and decent wages they thought they deserved. Earlier that spring, these skilled ribbon weavers united all of the silk workers and went on strike. The strikers' main demand was a call for the 8-hour workday. The strikers were aided by members of the industrial workers of the world, most notably Big Bill Haywood and Elizabeth Gurley Flynn. The strike also drew attention from intellectuals in Greenwich Village in New York. In fact, sometime after the strike started, many of the Greenwich villagers came to Paterson to observe the strike firsthand. They were impressed by the solidarity among the many nationalities of the silk workers and the courage of the strikers. The strike spread to other towns in New Jersey, as well as Pennsylvania, New York, and Connecticut. Meanwhile, by May, the Greenwich villagers were working on what they called the Paterson Pageant. They hoped to bring public attention to the workers' struggles by staging a dramatic performance of the strike. On June 7th, Madison Square Garden was overflowing with 15,000 audience members, and more filling the standing room only. Yet, while the Paterson Pageant did bring money into the strike fund, this was not enough to help all of the workers on strike. Finally, the strikers returned to work. They were able to get a 9-hour workday at most job sites, but the elusive quest for the 8-hour day remained incomplete.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
You know, it's like any of these New Deal ideas, and there have been a bunch of them out there. It takes the vision. It takes somebody in a position of power to say, this is the way we're going to go. This is the direction. Here, follow me. For too long, we've let corporate America decide our policies. Too many lobbyists have moved us in the direction of special interest, and we really haven't had an overarching policy as a country or a direction. And I know I can hear people go, "Well, we tried solar, Solyndra." When we were moving forward on solar, prices were coming down. It was doing really well, and then they allowed the bottom to fall out of it, and then they allowed it to be destroyed. Especially here where I'm at in Pennsylvania, all because they didn't update the energy portfolio, which just dropped the bottom completely out of the credits and the whole system of moving us away from the dirty stuff. And, this is where I'm hoping that, the next administration concerned about the future of this country and the future of our planet has some of this vision. And we can create some of the jobs that need to be created. We can undo some of the damage that's been done in rural parts of our country. If you've driven through southern West Virginia and you've seen the mountaintop removal sites and you've seen just these massive, sprawling, I used to joke that, driving through Pennsylvania and West Virginia with all the mountains, that they should just, level the whole thing off and make it like a garbage state or whatever. I was joking. There are forces that must have heard me and said, no, we can level those off. We'll blow those mountains off. We'll get everything we need and leave all of the external costs and all the degradation and all of the environmental nightmares to future generations and to the taxpayers. And we've allowed that to happen. And we've got an administration right now who's doing everything they can possibly do to deregulate to make it even worse. That's my problem. So reimagineappalachia.org, the website. Check it out. Quick break, right back. Stick around.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
The holy mantra of health professionals was coined about 2,500 years ago by the Greek physician Hippocrates. Do no harm. Of course, that was before corporate healthcare took charge and asserted a new guiding ethic: jack up profits. Putting this in practice, America's largest and richest hospital chains rushed to the front of the COVID-19 bailout line this spring to pull $15 billion from the government's emergency fund. They pocketed the taxpayers' money despite sitting on tens of billions of dollars of their own cash reserves. But hold your nose, for it gets much stinkier. The bailout was intended to keep hospital workers on the job, yet the wealthiest chains have hit nurses, janitors, and other crucial frontline staffers with layoffs, pay cuts, and deadly shortages of protective gear. For example, HCA, the $36 billion a year behemoth that's wallowing in profits, snatched $1 billion taxpayer bailout for itself, then demanded hospital staffers accept wage freezes, elimination of company pension payments, and other cuts, or have thousands of their jobs eliminated. However, in a public show of compassion, HCA's chief executive, Samuel Hazen, donated 2 months of his $1.4 million salary to an employee support fund. How magnanimous. No, his generosity is a deception, not a sacrifice. The trick is that a CEO's salary is a minuscule part of total pay. Hazen's annual bonus, stock payouts, and other compensation will raise his actual pay to $26 million this year. So his donation is less than 1% of his pay, and almost certainly he will write that off his income taxes. So we taxpayers underwrite his fat take-home and also subsidize his face-saving philanthropic gimmick. This is Jim Hightower saying, what we have here is a raging virus of executive suite greed, doing deeper damage to our society than COVID-19 ever could.
What do the corporate powers from Wall Street to Walmart have in common? They hate the Hightower Lowdown. You can see why at www.hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So it's kind of an interesting day watching Republicans basically trip over themselves and how much they hate the HEALS Act. And look, there's a lot to hate about what Mitch McConnell and the Republicans have put forth. But saying that it's too generous, saying that there's too much in it is not one of the things to hate. In this moment of crisis, in this moment of chaos, we should be thinking, again, bold, visionary thoughts of how we make sure that nobody loses their home, nobody goes broke, and that we don't force people back into situations where they have to go back to work and get sick to make this all worse. Had we just done a month ago what we should have done right from the beginning and shut down, keep everybody home, we'd be done with this by now. But clearly, we're not that country, and clearly they're not the leaders to get us there. But here to share some thoughts on this latest HEALS Act I've asked Michael Linden to come talk with us. He's the executive director of the Groundwork Collaborative. Groundworkcollaborative.org is their website. Michael, thanks for taking time for us.
Many thanks. I'm always happy to do it. Thanks for having me on.
So I'm looking at this, and again, my initial response when I saw it, not nearly bold enough. And in fact, one of these moments where you're going to take money away from working people who are struggling while simultaneously telling corporate America, we're bringing back the 3-martini lunch in the corporate dinner account. I don't know how with a straight face you do that.
Yeah, it's hard to believe if you wanted to write a bill making fun of the Republicans in the Senate and saying these are all the terrible things that they would never do because it would be too unpopular or too silly or too backwards. You'd come pretty close to describing the HEALS Act. I mean, literally having a bigger tax deduction for corporate executives who go out to eat and have drinks for their business relationships. That's in the bill, but a $400 a week cut in the income of 30 million unemployed Americans is also in the bill. That's it's bonkers. It's just completely backwards, and it's hard to believe that they really think that this is something that could pass. In fact, it makes me think that they don't think this is something that can pass, that their caucus is so divided that they don't really care what this bill is because they don't think anything's going to pass. So
do you think, because there's part of me that thinks that they know they're going to get thumped in November and that this is just a matter of going, you know what, we're going to scorch earth. We know in 2 years we'll have a chance at maybe taking the House back, and then maybe in 4 years we compete for the White House. But this November, 98 days from now, it's over. Because to come out with this skinny of a bill and then to complain about it 98 days before an election in the middle of a global pandemic when millions of people are worried they're not going to be able to pay their rent just seems kind of, stupid.
It's very hard to wrap your mind around. I mean, I think that a lot of Republicans in Washington really kind of crossed their fingers and hoped that coronavirus was going to go away. So they swallowed hard and they passed the CARES Act 4 months ago. Now, one thing to remember is that when they passed the CARES Act, the stock market was at a low. And so one thing that they do care about is how rich people are doing.
Right.
And rich people at that point were feeling nervous. Now, since then, the stock market has come back. And so rich people are doing reasonably well, as always seems to happen in recessions. But regular working people are really struggling. Republicans don't seem to care quite as much about that. So they don't feel that sense of urgency. But I think they were hoping that everything would kind of just get back to normal. And by this point, they could be back to like talking about Benghazi or emails or whatever their greatest hits are. But that's not what's happened. Exactly what, as you said, we could have had this thing under control, but we don't. And now they've trapped themselves in an ideological box where giving money to people to keep their heads above water while we close down and get this virus under control is just anathema to them. So now they're stuck. Now they're in a box and they can't figure out a way out of it. So they're just doing their greatest hits: tax cuts for rich people, corporate liability shields, and then talking about how we're overspending. It's just the greatest hits. I think some of them might think that this election is lost already, but I got to tell you, the one thing that's really not going to help them is cutting the income of 30 million Americans right now.
No, you're right.
I can't imagine how that's going to help them.
But here's the thing. I've gotten a number of emails from my, they were formerly Tea Party people. They don't really identify as T-Twits anymore, but they're giving me, we can't afford this, Rick. We've already given away so much money. Our debt's big. And, they're kind of whispering that. And today you tweeted out that there is no good economic reason to limit the size of the next relief and recovery package to some arbitrary number. So how big and how bold do you see we should go? Is the HEROES Act with the Democrats passed in the House, is that bold enough? Is there more? What do you see?
I think look, to be totally honest with you, from an economic standpoint, it probably needs to be larger than the HEROES Act. And the HEROES Act was passed 2 months ago. The Democrats in the House knew that this thing was not going away. They knew there was going to need to be some resolution of the UI cliff. There needed to be aid to state and local governments to prevent layoffs at that level. There needed to be hazard pay for essential workers. They knew this was coming. They knew this was important. But the truth is, I don't think anybody foresaw just how badly we would be, what a bad situation we would be in 4.5 months into this pandemic, where new cases are being added at 70,000 a day, which is twice as many as the previous peak. We're really, I think we are in a very deep economic and of course a deep public health hole. But to think about the scale of this, a few months ago, before things continued to get worse, the CBO thought that the gap between what our economy was going to produce and what it could be producing if things were going well was roughly $10 trillion over the next 10 years. It's enormous. That's a giant hole. Now, we don't necessarily have to fill all that hole at once, but 5-6 trillion would not be out of the realm of possibility over the next year to year and a half. So I think that is the scale we should be talking about. There's no budget constraint right now. Totally honest. It's not. Look, if you think about what are the things that you might be worried about with increasing debt, you'd be worried about either rising interest rates or inflation. Those are the two things that we should be worried about with rising debt. We've had historically low interest persistently for the last 10, 15 years. And right now, they're even lower than that. People are basically paying the federal government money to hold their money for them. Basically free money for public investment. And of course, inflation is at very low levels. And in fact, one thing we should be worried about inflation, as demand drops, prices might actually decline, which sounds like not a bad thing in an individual one situation, but it's very bad macroeconomically.
Yeah.
Did you lose me there? I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's interesting. Last thing I wanted to ask you about is the in this bill, there's no money for people to pay their mortgages or their rents. There's no moratorium. There's no help there, and it just seems to me that again, you didn't extend the unemployment benefit fully as I would think you should have done. You didn't expand food stamps anymore. There's so many, didn't extend enough funding for education for state and local governments, all down the line. You didn't extend enough help for people to get health insurance who have lost their jobs through no fault of their own. There's so much of this that isn't there. The other part is this eviction thing, which, the last study I saw said, this first of the month coming up, 30% of the people that they polled said they're not going to be able to pay their rent.
Yeah, we are. I don't want to sound apocalyptic, but we are very much on the precipice of a very bad economic collapse. The CARES Act, which expires essentially right now, it was a mixed bag. There were some good things in it, there were some bad things in it, but what we do know it did was, in the aggregate, it really did fill in the hole that happens when you have 20 million people lose their job in the span of 6 weeks. And what we actually saw was that for most households, their income basically either stayed the same or even went up a little bit. And as a result, they were still spending money in their local economies and keeping things afloat. It was very challenging, and I don't want to minimize how hard it was for a lot of small businesses and how hard it's been, but at least what you still had was customers who were there. And now what you're doing is sucking all of this money out of the economy by giving people a $400 a week pay cut. $400 a week is enormous. For some people, it's going to be up to half of their income just gone. And so plus then you have this cascade where they can't pay for their rent. So then the landlords don't have their income and they can't pay for groceries, so that the local shops don't have that income. And you have this cascading effect, which affects everybody else. So even if you yourself are not on UI, somebody who is, there's somebody in your community who you may not know it, but you're relying on them getting that UI check.
Right.
So it's a very big problem. And I'm very worried about what's going to happen over the next 3 months if this really does expire or get cut back so dramatically.
But what do you say to the person, Michael, who goes, well, you've got all these people who are collecting the extra $600. They are actually making more money than when they were working. And I know a couple of people who are on unemployment, they're making a little bit more money by being on unemployment than they were working. And I don't have a problem with that. I think that's actually not a bad thing because they're at home. They're not out spreading the virus. But what do you say to the people who are saying, well, they're just people who are going to suck this dry and they're not going to go back to work?
Well, I'd say a couple of things. First of all, those statistics that say that people are making a little more than they made when they were on the when they were employed, that's true, but that doesn't take into account the non-wage benefits that they were getting. So a lot of people were getting some version of healthcare or some retirement benefits or some paid leave, and that is all gone. And if you take into account, and for a lot of people on average, the important thing to note is on average, a worker's compensation is 30% non-wage compensation. So when people are talking about the UI check is more than the wage they used to make, that is true in some cases, but it's usually not true when you include these other non-wage benefits. So that's one point. A second point I'd make is that we just know for a fact, looking at the actual data, that is not preventing people from going back to work. Even if we think it should, we may want people not to go back to work right now because it's not safe. And as you said, it will spread the virus more. But for better or worse, that's not happening. There have been several studies of using different kinds of data that all show exactly the same thing. Overall, people are still going back to work. One study I saw that said 70% of the workers who went back to work over the last 2 months after coming off UI were receiving more in UI benefits than their new wage. So people are choosing to go back to work for a lower wage than their UI. It's not preventing them from taking that job, in part because, look, we should not infantilize people. People aren't stupid. They know that a steady job is better than a temporary unemployment check. They know that.
And also the law, Michael. I mean, I keep saying
there's
this.
the law, right?
The law is what it is. If you refuse to go back to the job, they cut you off the unemployment. I mean, this is the part that drives me insane when I listen to Lindsey Graham or any of these Republican senators go on about how people are choosing to not go back to work. And I'm going, no, you don't get that choice. I personally, from the beginning, said there should have been that choice. I should have the choice to forego the health care and the retirement, to stay home and collect the unemployment with the subsidy so that I can keep myself and my family home. And if I choose to go back into the workplace, if I believe the employer is going to work to keep me safe, then I should have the choice to do that. Right. I know Republicans love to talk about choice. This should be an actual choice.
It should be. And look, honestly, I think there's a good economic and public health argument to be made that we should be paying people to stay home right now. That actually is a pretty good strategy. We're not doing that. The UI is enough to keep people roughly whole while they are, as you put it, they are not making a choice. They don't really have a choice. But when they've lost their job or lost enormous amounts of their hours, the UI benefit is enough to roughly keep them whole. But it's not keeping them from going back to work, even if maybe that's actually what we wish would be happening. And so maybe the UI benefit should be $1,000 or $1,200. That's not on the table right now, but it's just not true. The thing I can't emphasize enough, we actually have real economic evidence and data and research. It just isn't true that on average, in the whole, people are choosing to stay home. They're not. They're taking the jobs if there are them. The thing that people don't understand, you have to remember, is right now there are 4 job seekers for every open position.
Right.
4 months ago, there was fewer than 1 job seeker for every open position. So it's not that people are, living large off of UI. There are no jobs.
So in saying that, what do you say? Because I keep seeing these stories popping up of employers saying, we just can't find any workers, Michael. We'd love to have more people come and apply for, they're just not there.
Yeah, I don't have a ton of trust in a self-interested employer saying that. There's no evidence that that's true. It's leverage for them. Maybe what they're trying to do is drum up attention. Maybe they are themselves conservative and want to make a political point, but it's just not showing up in the data. And if it was a real problem, it would show up somewhere, right? So I don't really believe that people are having, and there may be individual instances. I don't want to say that it's never happened, and some of your listeners might know somebody for whom it is true, and I can't promise that it's never happening. But in an economy where you have 30 million people who are right now either collecting or applied for unemployment benefits, if it was a real problem, it would show up somewhere in the data, and it's just not.
It's just not. So any thought that this is going to get passed through? How vigorously do you think the Republicans are going to push back on this? I see something passing. Something has to pass, but I'm just curious how much they water it down.
I'm worried. I'm worried about it because honestly, we've already gone over the cliff. People got their last UI checks with the $600 boost last week. So people right now this week are going to receive UI checks without that boost. So we're already over the cliff. And if Republicans in Congress don't hear from people and don't hear, hey, you need to do this, or I'm gonna hold you accountable, including honestly senators who are not up for re-election. I mean, Senator Toomey in Pennsylvania needs to hear from Pennsylvanians who have lost an enormous amount of income because of his opposition or inaction. It's the only thing that's going to move them, because right now I think they are sort of thinking we'll just muddle through, or the cake is baked, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
They may feel differently in a month when the economy has really cratered and rich people are starting to feel it because rich people don't have any customers anymore. That could happen, but I'm very nervous that they do not have a real sense of urgency around this.
I'm right there with you, Michael. I appreciate the time and the thoughts. Great stuff. Good talking with you, man.
Thanks for having me.
As always, our good friend Michael Linden, Executive Director of the Groundwork Collaborative. Make sure you check out their website, groundworkcollaborative.org. We'll get links out on social media how you can take a look at that. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2.
On this day in labor history, the year was 1917. That was the day more than 10,000 African Americans marched down New York's Fifth Avenue in what is known as the Silent Parade. The protest came in the aftermath of the July 2nd East St. Louis race riot and a number of lynchings in Texas. Organized by black scholar and activist W.E.B. Du Bois, James Weldon Johnson, and the NAACP, the Silent Parade protested lynchings and anti-black violence. Children led the march dressed in white. Women, who were also dressed in white, followed them. Men dressed in dark suits marched behind. It was considered the first public protest of racial violence in the United States. Alexis Newman describes the scene as the parade proceeds to Madison Square. The marchers carried banners and posters stating their reasons for the march. Both participants and onlookers remarked that this protest was unlike any other seen in the city and the nation. There were no chants, no songs, just silence. Some signs read, "Mother, do lynchers go to heaven?" and "Mr. President, why not make America safe for democracy?" Protesters hoped President Woodrow Wilson would make good on his election promises to promote rights for blacks. But Wilson took no action. In fact, he opposed anti-lynching legislation and continued segregationist policies in federal offices. In an editorial for the New York Age, James Weldon Johnson pointed out, quote, that their brothers and sisters, people just like them, were Jim Crowed and segregated and disenfranchised and oppressed and lynched and burned alive in this, the greatest republic in the world, the great leader in the fight for democracy and humanity.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
I look at the, again, this HEALS Act, which, it's odd watching the Republicans beat this around. And we're 98 days from the election. I can only think that they've kind of given up on Trump, because you would think that the Democrats, as I said, a couple of months ago when they passed the HEROES Act, that they're giving Trump a big win. They're giving him the ability to dole out a bunch of checks with his name on it, because he has to have his name on it. So a bunch of people are going to go, hey, I got this Trump money, much like they did during the Bush years when you got the Bush check. And, the Democrats have given him this win. They're like, look, for the good of the country, we don't care whose name's on the check. We need to save the country from collapse. And, I guess on a certain level, even to Trump's credit, that he backed off of his demand for a payroll tax credit, knowing that he needs this. It is interesting to me watching the Republicans in the Senate, though, who are pitching a fit. And I gotta think some of it is, is that, they feel like hypocrites. Because if you remember during the last Republican-led collapse of our economy back in 2008, we blew a ton of money. And we blew a ton of money bailing out banks and fattening and enriching corporate America. And we've done it again this time. Look, I have no disillusion in the reality that we've bailed out corporate America again. But this time, there's a little bit in there for average, everyday working people. The fact that they threw that extra $600 in for the unemployment was historic. And I told my daughter this. She's 18. She's had a job working as a cook, because she wants to be a chef, and she works in a restaurant, and she got laid off because of the virus, and she got this extra $600. She's like, oh my God, this is more than I make. And I'm like, don't expect that ever to happen again. This is a historic first. This will probably never happen again. And look, the Republicans immediately regretted it and immediately began trying to claw back at it and immediately began, demonizing people. But if you look at it, just stop and sit back for a second. Lose the partisan lens of it being a Republican or a Democrat. Someone who would vote against that little bit of increase for this short period of time for people who have lost their jobs, again, knowing what we know, that if your employer calls you back to work, you lose that. There's no choice that you get to keep it. Knowing that they would vote to take that away at a moment when people are really not able to pay their rent and are going to be struggling to put food on the table is just cruel. At a time when you're talking about new jets, you're talking about a new FBI building, you're bringing back the 3 martini lunch and the padded corporate dining accounts. We got money for all that stuff, but we can't increase food stamps. We can't increase the social safety net. And again, to me, this is another one of those moments of, 40 years of destruction of that social safety net has really shown the glaring effect of supply-side voodoo Reaganomics. We are living the neoliberal dream of you're on your own, buddy. And if you can't make it, well, there's the street corner. And we all like to believe that, we're going to make it through and we're going to figure it out. And we've got intestinal fortitude and we got bootstraps to pull ourselves up by, until you don't. And some of the stories that I hear from people are just heartbreaking. And yet still, we haven't dealt with the underlying problem of we're still in the middle of this pandemic. We're still struggling to fight through this. And had we the leadership from the beginning, and I go back to this often, this is a leadership issue. Had we the leadership from the beginning to shut down, to do what we said from the beginning, pay people to stay home, ensure that folks have the ability to hole up, you could have beaten this down. You could have. Had we just shut down, just for a month, everything, stop, nothing, nobody on the streets. Stay home, enjoy your family, play board games, play puzzles, whatever. But instead, no, we had to go to fast food restaurants and we had to go do all kinds of other stuff. Shut it down. We know that works. I was talking to a neighbor who his wife worked at a day camp, a summer camp. And, I had brought up the story of head lice. I said, we're going to send kids back into schools when you can't control an outbreak of head lice. And he goes, you're absolutely right. My wife, as one of the things she loved to do, she worked as a head counselor at this day camp. And right when you come in, they test everybody for head lice. Because evidently in one of these camp settings, head lice is just, it's horrible. The things that they have to do to remediate and just all kinds of craziness. And he said, right from the start, they check everybody and they quarantine people. And if a cabin gets it, they basically quarantine them, shut them off. And it's really draconian what he was saying. And he's going, this is what you have to do, though. This is how you stop this. And look, you're talking about a minor nuisance like head lice. You're not talking about something that could kill you. So a summer camp takes more precautions at keeping kids from getting head lice than the president of the United States takes from keeping the American people safe. I mean, there's something wrong there. And it made me think, well, maybe I should have his wife become president. Maybe she'd be able to figure it out. Because clearly we've got a president who hasn't. And is still clinging to this hope that it's just going to magically go away one day with a little disinfectant and a light bulb up the behind. Just plain nuts. Anyway, I got lots to get to on the virus front. When we come back, our good friend Dr. Kelly Senholtz is going to be here to share some thoughts on the woman yesterday and the viral video of evidently there's a cure. The hydroxychloroquine's a cure, and everyone who hates Donald Trump is against hydroxychloroquine, and the Democrats want this to be an election issue. You've heard it all. But she's going to share some thoughts on that. Maybe a little bit about Billy Barr. If I can coax it out of her. Quick break. Right back.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
Two hurricanes hitting two states
over just one weekend. California plugs in the world's largest battery.
Shocking.
Plus,
the fight is nowhere near over.
Trump administration takes major step toward approving Alaska's controversial Pebble Mine.
All of those rocky roads and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
What sells Alaska's seafood in general is that it comes from the pristine waters of Alaska. And how can you say that when you've got the world's largest open pit mine up in your headwaters of your largest salmon fishery?
Well, I guess you can't. Don't worry, Alaskan fishermen. Ivanka Trump's got a website for you. FindSomethingNew.org. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, just a few days ago on our previous GNR, you were warning that the 7th named hurricane of the season, Gonzalo, was forming in the Atlantic Ocean. Now it's gone.
Yes.
So you were wrong about hurricanes.
No, in fact, everything is escalating quite quickly. Just a day after Tropical Storm Gonzalo made history as the earliest ever G-named storm in an Atlantic hurricane season, Hurricane Hannah spun up in less than 24 hours.
Where'd that come from?
Exactly. And quickly made landfall on the southern Texas Gulf Coast on Saturday, a region that is already struggling with a very serious COVID-19 outbreak. And the last thing they need is a hurricane bringing flooding, widespread damage, power losses, and more strain on healthcare facilities.
And it's still only July.
Exactly. Hannah is the first actual hurricane of 2020 and also made history as the earliest 8th named Atlantic storm ever recorded, which we normally don't see until mid or late September. The Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico are both unusually warm right now, and that is fueling this rapid string of storms. Over in the Pacific, Hawaii got a close brush from Hurricane Douglas over the weekend. Douglas also has made extreme weather history. According to the National Hurricane Center, no hurricane on record has ever tracked so close to the island of Oahu. Douglas is the 7th hurricane to seriously threaten the Hawaiian Islands in the past 7 years, which previously had only seen 5 hurricanes in 60 years since 1950.
It's almost as if something is going on here.
Indeed, as climate scientists have been warning, as man-made global warming accelerates, the waters of the Pacific and the Atlantic are warming, pushing past the threshold where hurricanes are likely to form and grow. Hurricanes in Hawaii used to be a once-in-a-decade thing, maybe, and now it's almost annual. Meanwhile, in Alaska, the Trump administration and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has issued its final environmental impact statement for the controversial Pebble Mine, a truly massive proposed copper and gold mine that would be the largest in North America. The Corps concluded that the mine would not pose serious environmental risks. That is a sharp reversal from findings by the Obama administration's Environmental Protection Agency, which found that the mine's construction, operations, and toxic waste would permanently harm the pristine watershed of Bristol Bay, home to the world's largest salmon fishery. A broad coalition of Alaska Native tribes, commercial fishing, and sport fishing groups have been trying to stop the Pebble Mine for nearly 20 years because of the environmental damage that it would cause if developed. And that includes the threat of a catastrophic failure of a planned massive tailings dam where the mine's toxic mining waste would be stored high above the bay in perpetuity in earthquake country.
You know, I got to say, between Trump opening up ANWR for oil drilling and giving approval to the Pebble Mine, Alaska voted for Donald Trump in 2016. Are they going to do it again in 2020? Really?
That's an excellent question. Nellie Williams of the outdoor recreation group Trout Unlimited, in an interview with KTUU in Anchorage, underscored the necessity of keeping Bristol Bay pristine.
That thriving fishery supports a thriving community and thriving industry and thriving businesses and a thriving economy. And, you know, that's all we have to do is keep it intact, and it will keep giving the state for a long time.
The final environmental impact statement is not the final word. The coalition of residents and national environmental groups plan to challenge the permit in court, and the next administration could block it once again if Democrats win the White House in November. Pebble Mine is just one of several polluting infrastructure projects that could change depending on the outcome of the 2020 presidential election and control of the Senate.
It's as if there's a lot at stake on November 3rd.
Finally, there is some good news. Southern California has now connected the largest battery in the nation to its electric grid. The 250-megawatt Gateway Energy Storage Project in San Diego County will come online in August, storing zero-carbon energy from wind and solar projects to stabilize the state's grid against brownouts. It will be the largest battery storage system in the world, but only for a few years until the next larger energy storage projects come online.
And they are coming. For much more on all of those stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I think it's funny that Donald Trump is worried about Anthony Fauci's approval ratings, which are higher than his. And again, every bit of the response to this has just been the wrong direction. And look, we've got the wrong guy leading it. But if you paid attention to Billy Barr's testimony today, the fact that he did admit, look, Russia screwed around in our election in 2016, and they're probably doing it again. And you look at the fact that our intelligence agencies came out today and said that there are Russian operatives spreading disinformation about the virus. You know it's all right in front of us. And then you look at the crazy viral video yesterday from the Breitbart folks, and you got to wonder. That's why I've asked our good friend Dr. Kelly Senholz to come talk with us, share with us some information, and maybe straighten up some of the misinformation that's been out there, that it's all cured and we don't need a crummy mask. Dr. Senholz, thanks for taking time for us.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. I understand there's a cure. There was a woman yesterday ranting and raving in front of the Supreme Court that hydroxychloroquine.
Oh my gosh, it was unbelievable. Now, first of all, Twitter allowed this to happen. I know Facebook did and other social media sites, but, I was informing them every 5 minutes, you need to take this video down, you need to take it down. They left it up for something like 16 hours, which allowed it to go viral. And, of course, people that don't understand science or anything else thought it was fantastic. Less than an hour ago, the AP put out a really long story about the Russian intervention in the virus situation, which I just posted for everyone if you want to read it. This is clearly a Russian operation. Obviously, some of our Republican colleagues are helping them out. But during this time, when I was telling them to take the video down, I was getting attacked by probably thousands of Russian bots. They didn't want anybody saying anything negative about this video, which was utter BS. It was absolutely insane, just crazy talk. And they fought it as long as they could until it finally got taken down. It's a harbinger of things to come. It's what's going to happen over and over in the next couple of months, and it's going to get worse and stronger and more vicious and more horrifying with each attack.
Yeah.
Kind of like warfare.
No, I mean, we're really at information warfare. This is where we are. And the question, because I had a bunch of people sending it to me going, see, Rick, look, it's over. We have a cure. And I'm going, this doesn't seem, this just doesn't seem valid to me. A couple people in white coats, standing around having a press conference put on by Breitbart. I want to know who's funding this. I want to know who this group is. America's frontline doctors. What the hell is that?
Well, here's an interesting thing. There are 66 million doses of hydroxychloroquine stockpiled in the United States. So basically, instead of stockpiling PPE or testing equipment or putting money towards school facilities so they could start back safely, all the other things we know we need to combat this virus, Trump stockpiled hydroxychloroquine, and I have no doubt that if somebody dug deep enough, you'll find out he's got some financial interest there.
Yeah.
So we've got this massive pile of a drug that doesn't work, and he, just 4 hours ago, he said he thinks it works.
Yeah, I mean, he believes it works, and he's in the I believe crowd. And that's the scary thing. Anytime someone says I believe, I'm a little concerned. But here's the thing. What if, because I get this thrown back at me a lot. Well, what if I'm wrong? What if it does work? Because evidently the study that said that it was really dangerous, there's a doctor that, he's got some questionable things. So, I'm looking at this going, there's misinformation being thrown all over the place. What are people to believe? Which is why I bring people on like you that I trust to give us the straight skinny. How do you navigate these waters?
I want hydroxychloroquine to work. I want aspirin to work. There's nobody in the world that doesn't want a cure or some drug that will make the disease less severe, something we can do to keep people from this horrible ending, and there just isn't one yet. The other thing that's arising is people are getting pretty concerned about the way the vaccine is being rushed through and possibly not completely tested properly. So that is going to be a problem. Additionally, we talked about this before. When they get done making the vaccine, you have to have a distribution system. You have to have, vials and syringes and nurses and a plan. None of that has been done either. Everyone's talking about a vaccine being the October surprise, and I hate to be negative. Sometimes I'm negative, but I'm not. I think it's going to be something more. It'll be something worse and something bigger, but certainly they're going to say they have a vaccine and everything's going to be okay and it's all going to be over with. Your prior guest was excellent going over the economic situation right now. That, along with the virus, if not tempered pretty quickly, is going to result in about 1 million deaths by spring, May, June of next year. We're going to have about 250,000 deaths by the time the election rolls around. And if this virus gets out of control, Dr. Fauci warned us, if we did not get a grip on this virus, it could get so bad that it's just simply out of control.
Yeah.
There are parts of our country where that's kind of where we're headed. If that happens, along with excessive deaths due to poverty, which we have studies that outline how many deaths that would be, we're talking about 1 million people. Now, that's 1 in every 320 people in the United States. This is the numbers. People get down in the dirt on the details and what's happening and what about this and that. But when you step back and look at where we're headed and what's happening, this is a catastrophe of unprecedented proportion. And we just keep seeming to walking down the road. We're just, we can't seem to get a grip on this or stop the Republicans from what they're doing, stop them from harming people because they feel they benefit from it.
Yeah, I mean, a minute ago I said that, it's my belief that, in April, had we done the right thing, we could have been past this. And I got an email from someone telling me that I'm full of, a big steaming pile of, the president has done everything he can do and all of this stuff. Am I wrong? I mean, because had we locked down, had we done the things that we were being told at the time, and had we stayed the course without having these insane Republican governors and Donald Trump saying, no, we need to kick the doors open and get back to the bars and all of that, we could have been past this already.
The editor of Medscape, his name is Dr. Eric Topol. I'm sure a lot of your listeners know him. He's very famous. And he said quite some time ago that this is the worst public health disaster in history. And I agree completely with him. It's obviously the worst. It's not even close. This is the worst public health disaster. And what that means is that it was handled badly. Yeah. We know how to handle it. We know what to do.
Right. But what do you say?
Those of us who have been in the field are just in absolute pain watching this. It's just utterly, I say incompetence, but again, I feel that quite a bit of it is purposeful, and this Russian angle adds credence to my theory that they're doing it on purpose to create chaos and upset in our country, and they're willing to let people die to do it.
But what do you say? And I get this a lot from Trump supporters that had Obama been president, the same thing would have happened. Had Hillary been president, it would have been the same thing. That would have happened. Do you buy that?
No, any other person being president, this wouldn't have happened. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind. This is not even a close call. Back in, I think, February or early March, I remember saying that every hour they delay in shutting down the country and getting people wearing masks, every hour they delay is thousands of deaths. I had done some basic calculations, and in the end, a study done, I think it was in June, was almost spot on what I said, that almost all the deaths in South Korea, who had their first case the same day we did, they've only had like 329 deaths in the entire country. If you extrapolate for population, that's about 1,100 deaths. So we've got 149,000 more deaths than we should have had.
So you're not giving any pass here, because, it's my view that they boogered this up right from the start. And that I do believe, as I said, about 9/11, you had Al Gore president. I don't think 9/11 happens. You got Hillary Clinton. I don't think this happens.
I don't have the facilities of the United States government at my disposal.
Right.
I don't have, I'm just an emergency doctor with a history of working in disaster management. I have a history and a knowledge. In January, I knew this was bad. In January, I knew that we were going to need to close down, that a plan was going to have to be made, that we were going to have to, completely change our way of life. That was apparent to me in January. So, the president and his staff and our FDA and our all of our health facilities should have known, did know. They did know. They had done a tabletop exercise on what to do if this happened when Trump took office. He had everything he needed to do this, and he chose not to do it.
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to ask you about, because schools are about to be reopening at some point, and there's a big push in a lot of areas to reopen as normal. And I saw this report coming out of Florida that's pointing out that the hospitalization rates are rising, and they're rising among children 17 and under at a pretty big clip. And that we're still not sure what this is doing to kids. I know there's a bunch of studies out there that says, if you keep young kids home, it's really bad for them. And there's all this other stuff that's going on. I'm curious your thoughts, advice as a doctor for parents, looking at the school year.
I think it's really bad for old people to be home too and lonely. It's bad for all of us, but we're going to have to buck it up. I'm going to do a blog post. I was feeling a little like, oh my gosh, what can we do? And I started jotting down some things, and the list actually got pretty long. And one of the things on the list is we got to toughen up. We've been living a pretty cushy life for a very long time. Even the people who had poverty or had issues and have been on the bottom of the scale in our country, like you compare them to anywhere else in the world, and they still have a really good life.
Yeah.
We are about to enter. We're on the downward slide of a roller coaster. That once we get up speed, which is happening right now, there's no turning around. There's no brakes. We're just going to have to ride it out, and people are going to have to toughen up and help each other and tighten their community. And really form groups. I foresee them foregoing interstate travel. I foresee strict lockdowns in almost every state. I foresee conflict. I foresee dire economic disaster. And I foresee a lot of death. So all of that is going to be really challenging. And I say we're up to it. We can get through this to the other side, but we're going to have to help each other, and we're going to have to stand strong as Americans and just put this crazy stuff down as quickly as possible.
Yeah, no. In fact, I just had this conversation with my oldest daughter that, my great grandparents, and my grandparents lived through the Depression era. They were tough souls. They lived through, all of these things, the Spanish flu. They lived through the Great Depression. They were tough. They saved everything. They were hardy souls. We're not that people.
We're not that people. Although I have to say, I've noticed a little bit of a shift in the last 6 months. I think a lot of people are kind of waking up that something big is happening. They're not quite there, but they're kind of getting the clue that we're about to go down a hellhole. But we can do this. We got to keep talking. What you're doing is so amazingly valuable to give people information and a place to talk and connect and understand what's going on. That's really one of the things that's going to be very important in the coming months. I heard something really scary about coming out of the Trump administration. It was a threat to people talking to each other on social media. And as well as I do, when Trump says something, he means it. I think that those guys snatching people off the street are just the beginning, and we're just going to have to watch out for each other. We're going to have to get through this, and my hope is we can do this quickly. That this isn't going to be 40 years like East Germany. That this is going to be a down and the climb back out. That's my biggest hope.
98 days. 98 days till Election Day, Kelly.
98 days, baby. We can do this.
There you go. I appreciate the time and the thoughts. I know you'll come back as more comes out to keep us up to date and informed, and I always appreciate it.
All right. Take care.
Good stuff. Our good friend, Dr. Kelly Sennholz. And look, I'm like she said at the beginning, I wish hydroxychloroquine was the answer. I wish zinc was the answer. I wish we had the cure. From what I'm hearing, not yet. Love to hear your thoughts, though. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Do you buy the woman with the, we've got it already, no masks? Do you buy the viral video? rick@thericksmithshow.com. You can tell me one way or the other. And I do answer all emails personally. Thanks so much. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2.
On this day in labor history, the year was 1932. That was the day that flames burnt in the U.S. Capitol. The U.S. Armed Forces set fire to a shanty town of unemployed World War I veterans. The veterans had come to the Capitol to demand the bonus that they had been promised for their service. The payment was not due until 1945. But the nation was in the throes of the Great Depression. Desperate veterans demanded the bonus be paid early. Walter W. Walters, a veteran and unemployed former cannery worker, called for his fellow veterans to go to Washington, D.C. and demand payment. From across the country, veterans answered the call. Many hopped trains to make their way to the nation's capital. They called themselves the Bonus Expeditionary Force. This echoed the American Expeditionary Force, the name for U.S. troops that had fought in France during World War I. In May, the veterans began to arrive in Washington, D.C. They set up tents and shelters in vacant lots and open spaces. The largest encampment was along the Anacostia River. Some in Washington began to warn that the 8,000 protesters of the Bonus Army were led by communists. But retired Marine Corps Major General Smedley Butler came to the camp to encourage the protesters. He said,
I never saw such fine Americanism as is exhibited by you people. You have just as much right to have a lobby here as any steel corporation. Makes me so damn mad a whole lot of people speak of you as tramps. By God, they didn't speak of you as tramps in 1917 and 18. No.
But Army Chief of Staff General MacArthur was less sympathetic. He ordered troops to clear out the veterans. With cavalry, tanks, rifles, and tear gas, they ousted the protesters and burnt the Anacostia River encampment to the ground.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So interesting story that I'm not surprised at. Look, there are a lot of stores that are mandating that people wear masks, and I think it's a good thing. I think Home Depot and Kroger and all the Walmart and all of them, mandating them are the right thing. But there are a number of stores like Foot Locker and a couple of other food chains that have said, you know what, we're gonna put people out front. We're gonna hand out masks to people who don't have them. We're gonna request it, but we're not gonna mandate it. And there's part of me that goes, I understand it, because no employee making, minimum wage or $9 an hour wants to get into a fight with some QAnon twit over their made up HIPAA card because they believe that they're entitled and have some right. And, this is where, I struggle with my belief that, this is a societal thing. You know, when I grew up as a kid, if you didn't get into line, if you weren't part of society, someone smacked you upside the back of the head, made a citizen out of you, and you got into line. You know, when I was a kid, I would have fully expected, if this were the moment, that, you know, you weren't wearing a mask, somebody would walk up to you, smack you on the head, and tell you to put on a mask, and if you didn't, they'd whoop your behind out the door. We're a different country, and I think, you know, Kelly pointed that out. We are a much different country and have been moving, for good or bad, however you want to view that, in a much different direction than where my great-grandparents were. They had no time, and I still remember my great-grandmother had no time for nonsense, had no time for waste, had no time for, you know, just ridiculous, you know, arguments. And, you know, my grandparents' generation were kind of the same way, a little softer. And we've gotten that, you know, to the point where, you know, I think Kelly kind of right. We're going to have to toughen up a bit. Sadly, the side that believes they're the tough ones are the crazy ones who buy into these just idiotic conspiracy theories. And sadly, they're the ones who failed science class. The question is, how do we bring them around? Because this, again, the weakest link theory. Our collective survival is based on just how weak a link they actually are. But, you know, would you, if you were working in a crummy minimum wage job, would you be willing to go up to somebody and get into the argument that you know would be coming, just to enforce something that the state won't? I know I wouldn't. I'd love to hear your thoughts, though. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you missed any of today's program, ricksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. Thanks so much. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.